What's that? Who there? Whoa.
So, before we get into the moment, let's flip back to the Contour days. I think starting a company as a 20-year-old is insane, right? As you mentioned, a ton to bite off. And I would love to hear, take me back to those days. What were you thinking about when you were analyzing kind of the action camera space with Contour, and how do you even get into it?
I was not. That's the only way I started it. Because we started this company, it was like pre-everything, pre-iPhone, pre-social networking, right? You literally would make a product. You would take it to retailers. Like we were selling these cameras that would connect to your camcorder, right, to start. And we would sell those to like motorcycle shops and ski shops and like where you would do these activities. And so if you look at the reason or way you'd start the company, if you'd overthink it. And so I think the best part of actually starting when you're 20 is, I could have gone home to my parents' house if it didn't work out, right? Like get free food and rent for a while. So I think when you have a low cost structure, I'd be trying companies all the time, 2 or 3 of them, and seeing kind of what works and what sticks. What you find is that you just have to practice those early years. And so I think I just stumbled into it. Like we were skiers, wanted a simple way to record. That business plan gave us a little bit of money to start it. We literally started making the products by hand in the garage. We'd take them to the motorcycle retailer. I didn't even ride a motorcycle. We'd take it to the motorcycle retailer, sell the product, turn that into 2 more products. And that's just how we started. And so it's kind of old school entrepreneurship model. But that was the first beginning. And then Contour, we got a little bit lucky, which is YouTube came along. And so I think in retrospect now, I look for as a tidal wave. So it's like what consumer tidal wave is going on that you can surf, right? So for a moment, it's different than it was Contour, but we got lucky with Contour and that YouTube showed up. And when YouTube showed up, people wanted more voyeurism, if you will. They wanted to see themselves more. And so action cameras fit into that perfectly. And as YouTube came and the action cameras got to become HD, then everything took off. GoPro grew faster than we did, but our business doubled or tripled as soon as that came along.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get into next is I've been watching a few interviews that you were in and you've referenced this a couple of times. I'd love to get your take. So, fast forward a few years from starting it, you guys are doing well, business is growing, GoPro raises like 80 million and you guys raise like 5 to 10 million. And you said in these interviews, like looking back, that should have been a red flag, like, oh shit moment, something's going on here that's not good for us. But instead, like take me through, how did you think about it at the time? And, what would you have done, now, knowing what you know now, what would you have done?
Yeah, you learn a lot about winning markets and how to differentiate. And I think what we didn't know is the more junior group of people or not as, less experienced, we kind of ran it like number 2 should be number 1. So it was like Pepsi and Coke. Everyone kept using that analogy. Oh, it's such a big market. Pepsi's huge. And what you find out is that in the startup world, nobody wants to fund Pepsi. And so if you're losing to another startup that's better funded than you, it's much trickier in retrospect, right? If we were losing to a large company who's not very established and not very nimble, okay, but we were losing to another nimble, fast, aggressive startup who's having more traction than us and more money. And so I think learned at the end of the day, it's called law of diminishing returns, which just says number 1 in the market gets all the advantages. And number 2 takes 2 or 3 times the amount of money, even to match what number 1 is doing because there's so much momentum. I just didn't understand any of that. And so we kind of ran the company as if we could be number 1. You start doing a lot of justification. So when you're losing, you start justifying, oh, it's okay, we're doing great, Pepsi, Coke, right? We can be a big company too. And you realize like, no, the playbook should be different when you're number 2. And we just didn't know how to change that.
Yeah. What would you do with that playbook to press on that a little bit?
We had a 50-person company. It should have been a 25-person company. And then we should have owned a space, right? So if GoPro was we were trying to own the top of the market, be the expensive product, have 3 versions. And in retrospect, we needed to be half the size of the company and be $200 offering and just be really good at that, right? 1 product, $200 and just crush that. Instead, we were trying to do a little bit of everything. We were trying to do some channel retail we weren't amazing at. We were trying to do some product development by having the most advanced products, which cost you the most money, that have the highest BOM, that weren't necessarily winning more market share, right? We're doing some marketing, but not amazing at it. To GoPro's credit, they just stacked the deck on what Neck was good at, which was content marketing. I think that was their whole company, their whole machine. And I think in retrospect, you really want to stack the deck around one thing and be exceptional at it. And we just didn't do that. We did 2 or 3 things okay, and we just didn't have a way to win that market.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I think the other thing I was going to bring up, and then we can move on, is, you talked about at that time, you thought that if you built the best product, you'd win. Like that's how the market rewarded you. And maybe you guys did have the best product, but GoPro was the best at like pulling on the heartstrings kind of.
Yeah.
And that's how they scaled.
It's a naive way to think of it in retrospect. So I think number one, number two, it's hardly seeing where both are successful. I think Uber and Lyft might be a pretty interesting example where you have Lyft was a large enough market and could get enough money that they could really compete. I don't think they've taken over Uber on scale, but that's unique where one and two could both survive. In our world, they were kind of 90% of the market share. So we learned like if it's a dominant market, normally in markets like 60-40, like first is 60 and second is 40. But in their case, it was like 90-10. Like there was no path to coming back to that. And in retrospect, if we had, had half the number of people, so better cash flow, a great $200 product, we could have then partnered with or got to a company that had massive distribution that could have helped us.
Yeah. And so, as the company started slowing down, you eventually
slowing down, we ran into a cliff.
Yeah, it was an abrupt stop for sure, but
there was no slowing that thing down. Like once you get going and you have 50 people and everyone's self-justifying, but at the end of the day, as the entrepreneur, my voice ran out, right? Like I didn't really know what I was doing as a CEO. And so they fired me and then they bankrupted the company about 9 months later, right? Because it's not like the next group knew how to run the company. They were doing the same playbook. It's not like they fired me and changed the playbook. They kind of fired me and kept the same playbook. And so
they had nowhere to go. The cliff was gone.
Yeah, it was like a $30 million business that went gone overnight.
Yeah. So, what I'm fascinated about is I have a lot of entrepreneurs on here that they're winning big on their second or third go round. And I'd say you guys are winning big now with Moment. But that transition period from going, the first one didn't work and, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever, you're coming up with new ideas. I'd love for you to talk about in that period, what were some of the other ideas you pulled on? Because usually it's not just like one that you gravitate towards in the first week and go with. Entrepreneurs like play around with a lot of ideas and then ultimately pick one that has the most attractive upside. Talk through that a little bit.
You mean between Contour Moment timing?
Yeah, like during that interim period, did you come up with other ideas besides Moment that you were interested in?
Let's go back to my notebook. Yeah, you basically go back to what things you like to do. I think that's one thing I learned. In the first company, I wasn't necessarily really into action video. Somehow I stumbled into running an action camera business. I think I was more passionate about the building of the business and the team. And I realized actually one of the things I loved was really photography and my original cameras and using my phone more and more. So one thread was pictures and photography. So kind of, sketched down different ideas there. One was around, food and cooking. When time off, you start traveling and everyone starts little travel ideas. And then you realize it's a terrible idea because travel doesn't have enough frequency. But then, it's all about people too. So you got to figure out like, what are 2 or 3 people that want to start this with you? So the best way to think of it is you kind of do a bunch of little side projects with people. So get 2 or 3 people together and each of those little groups, you work on maybe a different few ideas. Maybe get together every Tuesday night. And then if it's kind of working every Tuesday and Thursday night, and if that's working every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday night, right? So you kind of build your way into like, this is working, but it's not just the product and ideas you've got to figure out. You've got to figure out who's the little team you want to work with. And so we were fortunate as, Contour imploded during my time off of figuring out what I was going to do. And one of the co-founders now for Moment was the designer there that we had kind of trained from an intern to running product by the time I left. And so when he was available, we just started kicking around ideas and again, started on let's meet every Tuesday and work on ideas. And then that started to work, right? So I think as you think of ideas, you have to think about what's the little group of couple of people I want to work with. And then what are those ideas we're interested in?